Good morning. It is Thursday, September the 5th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, and I'm the only true conservative in the United States today because I'm the only one who makes the presumption for the status quo. This, as opposed to Rush Limbaugh, who is not a conservative but a reactionary traditionalist. My podcast is about being a true conservative and using true conservatism to beat the left each and every day. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. It can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Ronald Hardgrove and on Facebook at The Drill. I started my socio-political odyssey as a conservative Republican. I then became a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party, and I'm now a registered independent and true conservative. I was taught by the left as I grew up how to dress, how to act, what to take seriously, who to associate with. And all that happened because the left has dominated American culture since I was a teenager. I thought that I could be conservative and act and dress and associate with people on the left. I was wrong. Whenever I engaged in a liberal in debate, I couldn't win. I couldn't win because I couldn't be taken seriously. I talked conservative, but I acted left. I used lefty lingo, I dressed like the left, and I engaged in petty vice and associated with people who engaged in vice. People who used drugs, gambled, consorted with prostitutes, stole, and cheated. It was no wonder the people around me didn't take me seriously. And that is who the left appealed to and still appeals to, but primarily appealed to back in the 60s and 70s, were the people on the margins, on the edges of society, the pimps and the drug dealers. So I realized that defeating the liberals and socialists starts with getting my act together, by not only voting conservative, but by talking, dressing, and acting conservative, by refusing to associate with common criminals and ne'er-do-wells, by being aware of and resisting left-wing counterculture. By becoming a true conservative, I will not only win, I will never lose. And the purpose of my broadcast is to share with my audience the lessons I learned on how to defeat the left each and every day. So this morning I'm going to address two mistakes that I made 2 days ago, why possibility thinking is bad, the preface from a book about Hong Kong, and more from the book about social justice warriors. All this when I get back. Thank you very much. Yesterday, I read selections, not yesterday, 2 days ago, I read selections from two books, one about mass shooting and the other about hurricanes. The selections were too short and failed to make the point I was looking for. The reason that I made these mistakes is because I failed to properly review the material. Next time, I will more thoroughly review my reading material before I broadcast it. So, possibility thinking. It sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? It's not. It leads to depression and potentially to suicide. How? Possibility thinking works like this. Reality doesn't exist. If reality doesn't exist, then we can't be sure of anything. And if we can't be sure of anything, then anything is possible. Now let's try a little thought experiment. Let's assume that I'm under 6 feet tall, and let's further assume that because of possibility thinking, I decide to become a basketball player. Not just a basketball player, but to play center for the Los Angeles Lakers. If I'm realistic, then I know that the odds of me making the cut are slim. If I fail to make the team, I'm disappointed. But I can learn from my mistake, realize that my goal was unrealistic, and get on with my life. However, if I'm a possibility thinker, I am conned into believing that everything in life is not only possible, but easy. All it requires is a good attitude. In this situation, when I get rejected by the team, I'm not just disappointed, but devastated. The rejection tells me that there's something very fundamentally wrong with me, that I must be a bad person. It is depressing, and if I am rejected several times like this, then I may become suicidal. So don't let the left con you with possibility thinking. because in the end, reality is your friend. When I come back, I'm going to be reading from Chapter 1 from the book, Hong Kong in the Shadow of China. Thank you very much, and welcome back. I've gone ahead and picked the following selection because Hong Kong has been in the news lately, and so I wanted to go ahead and, it's been in the news lately, and I wanted to go ahead and read something that had to do with, that was topical. So I found this book, Hong Kong in the Shadow of China, and I read the selection before. I'm now going to go ahead and broadcast it. But the latest news about Hong Kong is that the mayor of Hong Kong has withdrawn an extradition proposal that people in Hong Kong were protesting. There's been a lot of protests in Hong Kong about extradition treaties and various and things to do with voting, actually. And now, Chapter 1 from Hong Kong in the Shadow of China. The Hong Kong Hybrid. Hong Kong was not expecting the mass protests that erupted in late September 2014, a dispute that had started out as an argument among politicians and intellectuals over the details of an electoral system, an argument that had lasted for over 2 decades, suddenly morphed into a mass occupation of major urban thoroughfares by average citizens. The struggle began with the high drama and pictures of the Hong Kong police firing tear gas into the crowds, pictures that were quickly texted and retweeted around the world. A peaceful standoff ensued for some 2 months and ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. The only certainty was that nothing in Hong Kong politics would be the same. Prior to the protests, local observers knew that some kind of trouble was looming. The Chinese government in Beijing, which has sovereign authority over Hong Kong since 1997, had signaled back in December 2007 that the 2017 election for Hong Kong's chief executive would be on the basis of universal suffrage for the first time. Many in the city therefore believed that full democracy was around the corner. Yet, like morning mists, these hopes quickly dissipated. It started with a disagreement over whether the term universal suffrage would be defined narrowly or broadly. China made progressively clear that although it was now willing to have eligible voters themselves choose the next chief executive, it wished to have a say over which candidates would be on the ballot. A nominating committee composed mainly of local supporters of the Beijing government would set the list of candidates. The system, it seemed, would remain rigged after all. Preparations thus began for mass protests, which had become the main way for the Hong Kong public to participate in politics. People thought they knew how that protest would unfold. Pro-democracy professors and activists drawing on the ideas of deliberative democracy and civil disobedience had devised the Occupy Central movement. Central being the principal business and financial center on Hong Kong Island. A stated purpose of the movement was to alert all parties concerned that Hong Kong would go off a, quote, political reform cliff, unquote, if electoral change did not occur. To sound that alert, Occupy organizers promised that if the Chinese and Hong Kong governments did not back down from their restrictive nominating committee approach and accept the idea of nominations from the public, they would mobilize several tens of thousands of protesters to take over key streets in Central. The assumption was that the Occupy protesters would follow the norms of civil disobedience and submit to arrest. That was the scenario for which the Hong Kong police planned. Hong Kong companies whose offices were in Central made arrangements to continue operations even if the area was inaccessible for a couple of days. Individual citizens made their own preparations, but those who did not work in Central believed they would be unaffected by the protest. The Chinese government stated repeatedly that the electoral arrangements had to accord with its legal parameters, that it would not be intimidated, and that Occupy Central was illegal. It was a classic game of chicken, where everyone thought they knew the rules, but then the game changed. Enter Hong Kong's high school and university students. They joined with their elders in the Democratic camp in opposing the screening of candidates by a nominating committee biased toward Beijing and in giving the public the broadest possible role in the nomination process. But once Beijing ruled that the nominating committee and it alone would decide whom to consider, the students decided not to follow the preordained Occupy Central script and chose instead to preempt their elders. Full of idealism, they decided themselves, and for everyone else, the timing, locales, and scope of the protest movement. If they followed any script, it was the one that had been written in Taiwan 6 months before. There, a student activist group, angry about a trade and services agreement that the government had negotiated with Beijing, undertook a lightning occupation of the island's legislature that lasted for 23 days. Even though the specific issues in Hong Kong were very different, the political tactics gave evidence of a diffusion effect from Taiwan. After students boycotted classes during the week of September 22nd, some of them moved on the evening of September 26th to take over a small area within the government complex at Tamar in the Admiralty District. Over the next 2 days, through both arrests and the use of pepper spray, the police tried to disperse the crowds, which were still modest. Then, on Sunday, September 28th, the police used tear gas, which was reported on both television and social media. Instead of dispersing, the crowd grew to tens of thousands, more than the police could handle. The crowds took over the main thoroughfares that ran through Admiralty parallel to Hong Kong Harbor. Protesters also took over 2 other sites, Causeway Bay, a shopping area on Hong Kong Island frequented by tourists from the mainland of China, and Mong Kok, a district in the middle of Kowloon Peninsula across the harbor. And Central was never occupied. Umbrellas used to protect against tear gas, pepper spray, and sudden thunderstorms provided a symbol and a name for what became known as the Umbrella Movement. An uneasy standoff ensued. Both police and protesters generally exercised restraint. Attempts to encroach on the protesters' tent villages were effectively resisted. The most violence occurred in Mong Kok, which is a socially mixed area with a significant presence of triad gangsters. Some of those groups launched serious attacks on the local occupiers. In student-dominated Causeway Bay and Admiralty, peaceful coexistence prevailed as long as the police did not try to change the status quo, which they had discovered would only trigger a surge in the number of protesters. Gradually, the number of permanent demonstrators in these 3 areas declined. Numbers swelled in the evenings and on weekends when most people didn't have to go to work or to class, but the potential for rapid mobilization remained. Beijing responded with a hard line. It cast itself as the defender of the rule of law and the protesters as lawbreakers. If universal suffrage was to happen, it would be within the parameters that the government had laid down. Beijing had spurned proposals that would produce a genuinely competitive election within Chinese parameters. Beijing also sought to divert blame away from its own recalcitrants and onto alleged foreign forces that it asserted were instigating the disorder. More ominously, there was a lurking fear that sooner or later Beijing would carry out a violent crackdown, as it had done across China in the spring of 1989. Deng Xiaoping had contemplated precisely this contingency when he said in 1987, quote, "After 1997, we shall still allow people in Hong Kong to attack the Chinese Communist Party and China verbally. But what if they should turn their words into action, trying to convert Hong Kong into a base of opposition to the mainland under the pretext of democracy? Then we would have no choice but to intervene. First, the administrative bodies in Hong Kong should intervene. Mainland troops stationed there would not necessarily be used. They would be used only if there were disturbances, serious disturbances. Anyway, intervention of some sort would be necessary," unquote. As unhappy as Beijing was about the ongoing occupation in the fall of 2014, it was prepared to follow Deng's dictum and to have the Hong Kong government take the lead. The apparent strategy was to let the movement peter out as the inconvenience it caused wore on affected citizens. How long this patience would have lasted is anybody's guess, because in the end, Chinese intervention was not necessary. There was an effort to end the occupation by negotiation, but it fizzled. On the evening of October 21st, senior officials of the Hong Kong Special Administration Region, Hong Kong SAR, government conducted a televised dialogue with the leaders of the Hong Kong Federation of Students, one of the leading protest groups. But there was no movement on the key issues because neither side had much flexibility. The Hong Kong government's hands were tied by Beijing's uncompromising attitude toward election arrangements. The Hong Kong Federation of Students was handicapped by the loose and leaderless character of the movement. Consequently, the first dialogue session was the last one. In the end, it was Hong Kong's much-respected judiciary that paved the way for the end of the protests. Beginning in the latter part of October, groups of taxi drivers and minibus companies and others who believed the occupation had deprived them of their livelihood filed suits in local courts, seeking clearance of the protest areas. The plaintiffs won their cases, and the Hong Kong police were authorized to assist court bailiffs in carrying out the injunction. The first action occurred during the week of November 17th in the Mong Kok area, but not without violent clashes between police and the protesters there. Student leaders responded with improvisation, first trying to travel to Beijing to speak with Chinese leaders. They were not allowed to leave Hong Kong, and then participating in a brief hunger strike. More radical elements attempted to break into the Legislative Council building on November 18th and stormed the government administration offices at the end of the month. The Legislative Council is the unicameral legislature of the Hong Kong SAR. But enforcement of the court order continued, and Admiralty was eventually cleared on December 10th and Causeway Bay shortly thereafter. After 75 days, the most dramatic event in Hong Kong's political history had come to an end. The umbrella movement may have surprised residents, the Hong Kong government, and the People's Republic of China government in how it occurred, but it was only the latest and most contentious episode in a 3-decade struggle by proponents of a more democratic system. Moreover, the movement also manifested a number of widening cleavages in Hong Kong society between the PRC and Hong Kong governments and the pan-democratic movement, between the local wealthy business elite and the middle class, between the young and their elders, between those who gave priority to political order and economic growth and those who value open participation, between those who wish to limit the competition for political power and those who wish to remove those limits, and between those who fear populist politics and those who embrace them. And this book explores these cleavages and what they mean for both Hong Kong's future prosperity and its government. And that is my selection from Hong Kong in the Shadow of China. And when I come back, I will be reading more from the book that I started the other day called SJWs, which stands for Social Justice Warriors. SJWs always lie. Thank you very much. Welcome back. SJWs always lie. I like this particular book because it has a lot of insight into the psychology of the left and how to defeat. It demonstrates how the left uses psychology and psychological tactics and techniques to try to bully and intimidate their opponents. And this book goes on to show how to counter that bullying and intimidation. Chapter 1, an introduction to the social justice warrior. First, a quote. The new world order of social justice and comradeship, the rational and classless state, is no wild idealistic dream, but a logical extrapolation from the whole course of evolution, having no less authority than that behind it, and therefore of all faiths, the most rational. Unquote. Joseph Needham, Time, the Refreshing River, from 1943. It begins on a day like any other. You drive to work, listen to the radio as the traffic inches along, park the car when you finally arrive at work, and greet the secretary at the front desk as you walk to your office. You go over your morning emails while drinking from the coffee mug a vendor gave you, and as you're in the middle of writing a reply to one of your accounts, your boss knocks on your open door. "What's up?" you say without turning around to look at him, continuing to type on your keyboard. "Do you have some time to stop by my office this morning?" he says. Something in his voice sounds unusual. You stop typing and turn around. Your eyes narrow. Your boss seems uncomfortable. He doesn't seem to want to meet your eyes. "Sure, let me just send a few more of these emails that can't wait. 15 minutes, okay?" "That will be fine." He's looking strangely cagey. Normally he'll come right in and sit down on the corner of your desk and talk your ear off about the weekend, but now it's as if he can't wait to get out of your office. After 10 years at the company, you've got a pretty good sense for when something is taking place behind the scenes among the higher-ups. And now your corporate survival radar is definitely picking up signs of potential trouble on the horizon. Is it a layoff? Is the company up for sale? Did one of your accounts cancel without telling you? You rack your brain, but you can't think of any major screw-ups you might have committed. There's no indication of any disasters looming in your email or on your voicemail this morning. Did accounting reject your expenses from your last trip to San Francisco? That doesn't seem likely. You didn't even spend your full per diem. Quote, so what's this about anyway? You try to make it sound natural, but for some reason your throat is suddenly dry and your voice sounds tight. He looks up and down the hallway before answering. He's hesitant to answer, and when he does, he won't tell you anything. Well, I'd rather wait till you come to my office to discuss it. I'll see you there in 15. He leaves, and you stare at the empty doorway for a long time, wondering what on earth that was all about. You turn back to your computer and go through your emails mechanically, your mind still half occupied with trying to figure out what this mysterious meeting could possibly be about. 15 minutes later, reinforced with a fresh mug of coffee, you make your way to your boss's office with a vague feeling of trepidation. Hey, so what's going on? You say, your voice artificially bright. Would you mind closing the door? Your boss says. He's not smiling. Oh, this is not going to be good, you think, even as you force a smile and comply before taking the empty chair in front of his desk. He clears his throat. He folds his hands. He forces himself to look at you. He's wearing his serious face, the one you saw last when he announced the most recent round of layoffs. He clears his throat again. It's obvious that he really doesn't want to talk to you about whatever it is. With some difficulty, you resist the urge to tell him to hurry up and get on with it already. I'm afraid we've had a complaint about an incident that appears to concern a violation of the company's code of conduct last month, he says, by you. The code of conduct? What the hell? You're vaguely aware that the company has one. You even read it for laughs one slow afternoon, so you know it's nothing but 2 pages of meaningless feel-good blather. Equal opportunity, be nice, be respectful, don't discriminate, don't kill anyone, yada, yada, yada. You're not even sure how anyone in your position could violate the code of conduct if he tried, short of stealing something from the company or punching somebody in the face. It's not like you have the power to hire or fire anyone. And so it begins. Without even realizing it, you have been offered as a sacrifice to that most rational of faiths, social justice. 6 weeks and several meetings with human resources later, you're still not entirely sure what happened or exactly what you did to get yourself in trouble. No one will actually tell you anything. You still don't know the name of your accuser, although you've narrowed it down to the suspects, narrowed down the suspects to 3 likely candidates. And you've been informed that your attendance at an awareness seminar scheduled for this fall will be considered mandatory. But at least you've still got your job. The whispers seem to have stopped, and people have largely stopped looking at you funny. It appears you've managed to put the dead man walking stigma behind you. All in all, everything seems to be back to the way it was before, but with one important exception. You've changed. You're wary now. You walk into work as if entering a minefield. In every conversation, in every meeting, you're careful to watch your every word. Every casual encounter in the hallway becomes a potential confrontation. Every time you meet a coworker's eyes, you wonder if they're well-disposed or a secret enemy seeking to destroy your job, your career, and your life. You walk on eggshells, and you learn to stop sharing your opinion with anyone about anything unless it is about something safely innocuous, like sports. What you don't realize is that you've just survived your first SJW attack. And you're luckier than most. You still have your job, you still have your reputation, and you still have your friends and family. Tens of thousands of people are not so lucky. In the universities, in the churches, in the corporations, in the professional associations, in the editorial offices, in the game studios, and just about everywhere else you can imagine, free speech and free thought are under siege by a group of fanatics as self-righteous as Savonarola, and as ruthless as Stalin, as ambitious as Napoleon, and as crazy as Caligula. And I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. And when I come back, I will conclude the episode. Thank you very much. Who are the true conservatives? They are the people that understand that conservatism is not just political, but cultural as well. They are patriotic people who use common sense, they make judgments, refuse to speculate, speak clearly and definitively, and are not afraid to say no. They are open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They are consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.